Let's go back to April 2026. The global economy was staring right into an abyss. The world's most critical oil artery, the one that keeps everything running, was suddenly clamped shut. A full-blown catastrophe seemed pretty much inevitable. But here's the thing, it wasn't. We're about to break down how three really unexpected factors turned what should have been a total disaster into a severe but ultimately survivable crisis. I mean, can you imagine waking up to these headlines? In late April 2026, this is exactly what the world saw. Bloomberg, Reuters, you name it, every major outlet was just flashing these red alerts. Oil soars, Strait of Hormuz closed. You can just feel the panic ripping through the markets. The vital flow of energy that powers our entire world had just been choked off at its most vulnerable point. And look, this wasn't some simple shipping accident, not at all. It was the boiling point of a long simmering geopolitical conflict. A really fragile ceasefire between the US and Iran just shattered, and that led to direct military engagement right there in the strait. So suddenly, this was no longer just an economic crisis, it was a military one, with some pretty frightening global implications. So yeah, that brings us to this, a choke point snapping shut. At the absolute heart of the problem was the Strait of Hormuz itself. The world's most critical oil choke point had, for all intents and purposes, been blockaded, bringing the lifeblood of the global economy to a grinding halt. Now, to really get the scale of this, you have to appreciate what this one waterway actually represents. Roughly 20%, that's a full 1/5 of the entire world's daily oil supply, passes through this one narrow channel. And in April 2026, that flow, it just stopped. The gravity of the situation, you really can't overstate it. Experts were crystal clear. This was not a minor disruption. Without some kind of safety valve, the global economy was literally careening towards an energy shock bigger than anything we'd seen in half a century. The potential for a deep global recession, it was very, very real. Okay, so what was the immediate fallout? A shock this big doesn't just ripple through the system, it slams into it. This wasn't some slow-motion problem. It was an instant, full-blown crisis for global markets and supply chains. The chain reaction was immediate, and it was brutal. With their main shipping route blocked, major producers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE had to shut in production. Why? There was simply nowhere for the oil to go. Tankers were either stuck or forced to take these incredibly long, incredibly expensive detours all the way around Africa. This supply crunch sent spot prices, that's the price for immediate oil delivery, skyrocketing to as high as $150 a barrel. It was the single biggest monthly price gain in history. But then, just as the system was about to completely break, something pretty remarkable happened. Three critical lifelines emerged. And these weren't planned together, not at all, but they provided just enough relief to pull the market back from the brink of a total collapse. So what was the solution? Well, it was this really unlikely combination of things. First, you had Oman's unique geographical advantage. Second, Saudi Arabia's decades-old infrastructural foresight. And third, a completely unexpected supply surge from halfway around the world in Venezuela. Let's break down each one. The first lifeline? It was all about geography, it really was. Oman's ports, like Salalah and Muscat, are critically located outside the Strait of Hormuz. They sit right on the Arabian Sea, which made them a safe zone away from the conflict. This allowed crude from some Gulf producers to be moved overland and loaded onto tankers right there, letting physical trade continue when the Persian Gulf was a total no-go zone. Oman basically became the logistical hero at the crisis. Lifeline number two was just sheer engineering foresight. Decades earlier, Saudi Arabia had built the East-West pipeline for exactly this kind of scenario. This massive piece of infrastructure allowed them to pump millions of barrels of oil per day from their eastern fields directly to the port of Yanbu on the Red Sea, completely bypassing that Hormuz choke point. So while their Gulf ports were blocked, Yanbu was hitting record export levels. And for our third lifeline, well, here is a plot twist from clear across the globe. Just as the market was desperate for barrels from anywhere outside the Middle East, Venezuela's production surged. Following some recent sanctions relief and a flood of new investment, their exports jumped to over 1 million barrels a day. This provided the single largest source of new crude to the market exactly when it was needed most, a crucial buffer from a completely different continent. So how did these three lifelines actually work together to stop a catastrophe? Well, they didn't solve the crisis overnight, but they provided just enough flexibility and alternative supply to stop a total market seizure.
They allowed the system to bend under extreme pressure rather than shatter completely.
This chart right here, it shows you exactly what happened. You see that initial shock, right? Prices shooting up from around $60 to a peak of $118. A huge jump. But then the lifelines kick in. The price doesn't spiral up to that feared $150 or $200. The alternative supplies from Oman, the Saudi pipeline, and Venezuela started to fill the gaps, calming the panic and allowing the price to stabilize and then fall back to around 96. That peak, that was the moment the system began to recover.
You know, what we all witnessed in 2026 was a masterclass in what experts call crisis resilience. It's a system's ability to take a massive punch and not get knocked out completely. And in this case, that resilience came directly from pre-built infrastructure, like that Saudi pipeline, and from supply diversity from places like Venezuela.
So what are the big takeaways from all of this? First, geography and infrastructure matter a lot. Those Omani ports and Saudi pipelines were absolute game changers. Second, a diverse supply chain is strategic insurance against regional crises. Third, we saw that crude oil, with its huge network of pipelines, has more flexibility than fuels like LNG, liquefied natural gas, which rely almost entirely on specialized ships that can't be easily rerouted. And finally, the most important lesson of all, the system held this time.
And that really brings us to the crucial final question, doesn't it? These lifelines prevented a catastrophe in 2026, but they didn't eliminate our reliance on fragile choke points. We saw the system's incredible resilience, sure, but we also saw its deep-seated vulnerability. The system held this time, but is it ready for the next shock?